So the purpose of this session here today is to give you some first-hand experience. We'd like to have you do the exercise. It's a very simple 50-minute exercise. Some first-hand experience with a classroom exercise that helps teach the meta skill of scientific thinking. And by meta skill, of course, I mean it's a skill that can be applied to almost anything. And this is a fascinating subject to me. I have two daughters who are 24 and 26 years old now. And you know, when you're a parent, you wonder, what can I teach my children, right? And at first you want to teach them everything you know, right? But then you realize we have no idea what they're going to be facing 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the future. And eventually we won't even be there. We'll be gone, right? So we can't predict what situations they will face in their future. So maybe the best we can do is to teach a way of handling the problems themselves, a way of achieving the goals themselves, and then they can apply it to whatever they are working on. Maybe the best we can do. It's a little more difficult to teach a meta skill than just to teach information, which again is why it says here, this is an exercise to help teach. It takes a while to develop a habit, a mental habit in the students, right? I like this picture here. Scientific, you know, it's a super cape, Superman, Batman, right? Scientific powers. I think if you have these powers, you can do just about anything. So what we're trying to do is make scientific thinking, maybe this is a little bit to your question, something that can be learned by anyone. And we're doing that by combining two things. One, we're taking a pattern of scientific thinking, although it's a pattern of scientific thinking more for everyday life. And we're combining it with routines of deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is actually a concept, right? It's coming from a lot of the brain research and so forth. How do humans actually learn? How do humans actually acquire new skills? So it's a certain kind of practice. It's definitely not just a lecture, which I think for many university teachers is a challenge, because at our university, for example, there are classrooms where the tables are bolted to the floor in a U shape around the teacher. And so of course the concept is the teacher is talking and you're writing down. Well, that's one concept, right? But that's not practice, right? So how do we practice? Later this week we're having a European Lean Educator Conference, and one of the things I'll be talking about at the conference that Joakim has and Pia have organized is how do we meet this challenge of practicing in the university setting, right? So if we combine these two things, a scientific thinking pattern and deliberate practice, we can actually make it something that can be learned by anyone. So the desired outcome of this session today, I think we're scheduled to go until 2:30, is that correct? 2 o'clock, yeah. Is for you to run the exercise in your classroom. Now, we can't tell you what to do, and you might leave here and go, I don't want to do that. That's okay. But everything, it's being tested in classrooms for the last year. It's pretty simple. Once you've done it here, it's pretty easy to use, and you can change it. All the materials are free. All the materials are PowerPoint and Word, so if you want to use different language in your classroom, you can change the words. We're not selling anything. This is, people think I'm crazy. This is something, you know, because it makes sense. It makes sense. You know, when you deal with old people, changing them is very difficult. When you deal with young people like you do, it's okay, let's do it this way. Let's try it this way. And then number two, the desired outcome for today is that you would build on the 4-step scientific pattern that we'll go through in ways that suit your classroom. And then we end up learning from you. So if you take it and you do it and you say, well, I'd like to do this a little bit differently to suit my situation or my goal or my needs, and then we see what you do, we learn from that. So that's kind of the goal. Do it once in your classroom and then adjust it. So you've already seen the agenda for today. All the materials are free download. This is the website in the United States, katadegrow.com. Pia, your website in Sweden, have you already given them the...
We do it in the end of the day, and also as a paper here where you find all the material in Swedish.
Okay.
And as for you, it's free, and it's possible to change and adjust it in the way you want.
Okay, so the materials, Pia and Joakim have translated the materials into Swedish language. Changed them too. That's fine. This is a great picture, isn't it? I really like that one. Yeah. He's not as happy. He's the timekeeper, right? And they're building the puzzle. They have the challenge. Let's take a quick look at scientific thinking. I don't want to dwell on this very long. Maybe it's a little bit to your question too. So how many times has this happened to you? You are focused on something, maybe cooking on the stove, and out of the corner of your eye you see something. And you say, ah, there's the cat, or the dog, or a box, or something on the chair, right? But when you turn your head to look, it's something else. It's a jacket, whatever. It's something other than you expect, right? Happens all the time, happens to all of us. What I find interesting about this phenomenon is that our brain did not say, there's something over there. Could be the cat. Not sure. Please get more information. Or don't know. Instead, the brain immediately fills in the blank, right? So we have a knowledge threshold. There's always a knowledge threshold. We go through life with, it's actually quite close. You know, as you get older, the knowledge threshold comes in very, very close. When you're young, you know, I know everything. So there's a knowledge threshold, but our brain automatically fills in the blanks, right? And don't get me wrong, this is an important mechanism, as you know. This cognitive mechanism helps us get through the day, it helps us survive. Imagine if you had to make all your decisions consciously, you know, riding a bike in traffic, in a conversation, all the things you do in a day, if you had to consciously think about and conclude each individual little step, you wouldn't make it through the day, right? There are some scientists who say we would have been eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, right? The one who says, no, I see something there, I'm going to run away, survived. Those are the genes we got. The one who said, oh, I wonder what that is over there. I think I need to go get more information. You know, they're gone. They didn't make it through. So what's interesting about this to me is not that this happens, but that our brain doesn't tell us that it's happening. The brain doesn't alert us that it is filling in the blanks. It happens automatically. And that's what we mean by narratives, right up here. We create our story about how things are. And it's very useful, very helpful. We would not survive without it, but it causes some problems. We don't see our knowledge thresholds. We feel quite sure that's the cat. And then we operate on this decision, and that's where we get into trouble as humans. So scientific thinking, and again, I think I'm probably telling you things you already know, scientific thinking is a kind of countermeasure to that human or cognitive tendency, and I love this definition of scientific thinking. A routine of intentional coordination between what we think will happen, what actually happens, and adjusting based on what we learn from the difference. Very simple definition. This diagram kind of captures it, you know, what we expect to happen. I think that's a cat. I turn my head. What actually happened, it's my jacket. I learned something, right? And I'm sure some of you are thinking right now, we don't promote this in daily life. We don't promote this inside of our organizations. We promote getting the right answer. We promote being certain, right? It's interesting inside Toyota, they don't want you to say you know if you don't know, because it's dangerous. And when I first ran into this, I thought, oh, life at Toyota is wonderful. You know, you're in the meeting, you just say, I don't know. You know, all done. And it turns out what your manager at Toyota, your boss, wants you to say, I don't know if you don't know, but then you have to explain how will you figure it out. What is your next experiment? How are you going to test it? How will you figure it out? Now, you know, in Detroit, where I come from, where the automotive companies, you know, you're in a meeting and everybody's talking about what they think and they pick the best idea and they go with it, right, as if it's true. So it's a very different way of working. And again, I think that this scientific thinking, which here is kind of depicted in a laboratory setting, I think it's actually a skill for every day. And I actually think that many of the issues we face as humans, again, in our cities and our countries and in the world, we're not going to be able to solve those problems unless we start thinking more scientifically as a whole, not just scientists. Not just scientists. Yes?
This is so close to entrepreneurship, maybe it's the same thinking. And
I agree.
This is filling my heart with so much emotions when I talk about it.
Yeah.
The school has been and still are like a line. You start here, you have
Right.
something you have to learn, and then you have tests, and then you go
Right.
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 And we're talking much of this way of thinking in a circle.
Right. More of a feedback
Yeah,
loop.
of course,
Yeah.
you try, and then you think, okay, this is not good enough. I have to learn something more about it,
Mhm.
and I go back and I change it, and then it's the fantastic outcome. But this is the big black hole
Yeah.
in the school system,
Yeah.
that we not allow our children to experience this and try to this, because we are always looking for the right answer.
That's right.
Teaching them how to get the right
Sure.
answer. Right now, this is
Well, you know, I'm not here to criticize the school system by any means. It's the
this
same.
is something that
It's-
is lacking. We need this.
It's the same in the companies, so it's no different inside the company. This is not rewarded, right? What rewarded is having the right idea and going with the idea, right? And it is interesting if you look at business, which is what I've studied most of my life. The entrepreneurs, they operate this way.
Of course.
They have a goal, and they say, well, we have to test, you know, and they change really quickly. They have a quick meeting, they say, okay, well, that didn't work, you know, what do we learn? What do we have to adjust? Quick, you know, we only have so much money before we run out. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you like the idea, the military works the same way. You have to adjust really quickly, and the cost, if you don't, is very high. So, you know, you're in the battle, and what are we learning? What do we need to change? Let's change right away. Let's adjust. Keep going, right? So you're constantly looking for reality. Businesses then move from an entrepreneurial phase to sort of scaling up, right? And then there's the next generation of more professional managers, and this goes away.
I think it was a US company that had the person in the company that had failed and then success and explained what they have learned
Right.
in that failure or mistake. They awarded the person with a prize every month.
Right.
And that was the
So that creates a certain kind of thinking. Yeah.
Because then you have to explain what you learned about the experience.
Right.
And that was the big thing.
One thing that we miss at Toyota, they have goals, they have objectives, they have financial objectives, and those are not, they don't let go of those. I think a lot of Westerners look at something like this and say, oh, it's just a kind of a happy garden in the company where everybody's just kind of experimenting. But you still have to have your goals, and the goals still have to have a date on them, right? So it doesn't mean it's not a completely free environment. All right. So, scientific thinking, you know, there's an idea that we're born with it. Maybe we are, you know, when we're really little we explore things and we adjust our brain to like I mentioned. But it goes away. Scientific thinking is not our default mode as adults. Adults are kind of bad at scientific thinking due to those natural unconscious mental mechanisms or our narratives where we think we know and we operate on that. So really scientific thinking is something that humans learn through practice. And there we are again at practice, right? So what is Kata in the classroom? It's just an exercise, and all it does is introduce, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, introduces a practical pattern of scientific thinking in an engaging way that easily fits within a teacher's existing instructional plan. This is intended to be something small. This is intended to fit in one class period. You can spread it to the next class period. Maybe in the second class period you'd have a discussion. So what did we learn yesterday? That kind of thing. This is not a program. My vision, frankly, is that teachers take this and take it in many different directions. That's something I can't predict. It's a 50-minute activity. We'll probably take a little longer today because we'll make some comments. With 3-minute rounds, it involves student teams working on a number of self-generated iterations to complete a small puzzle. Essentially, we're teaching these things, or it's practicing these things: scientific and creative thinking, or like you say, entrepreneurial thinking, collaboration, and then communication. How can I capture data and communicate data, right? Student teams follow the improvement kata pattern, which is the same pattern that Toyota is using, to establish a goal and then experiment it toward it from round to round. This is the improvement kata pattern, and again, we'll go through it so I don't have to spend very much time on it right now. It's a 4-step scientific pattern. Maybe this is also in response to your question, of thinking and working. It's a practice routine in business organizations around the world these days. Basically, it means you experiment your way to your goal instead of trying to decide your way to the goal. Number one, there has to be some overall direction or challenge. What's the big direction we're trying to get to? Number two, then you have to understand where you are. There's a lot of effort at Toyota to say, before we get going, understand clearly where we are. Once you understand where you are, then you can create a next target condition on the way to your challenge. So based on the direction you want to go in and where you are today, you sort of establish this next goal on the way. And that's pretty important, to learn how to break down these seemingly frightening challenges, right, into, okay, maybe I just need to get there by 2 weeks, something like that. And along this path here, this is where the student gets, it's not confidence, it's self-efficacy. Through practice, the student starts to get a feeling like, I don't know how I will get there, but I am comfortable with that because I've done this before. I know how to work to get there. And that's a meta skill. And then finally, once you have a target condition, then you can start conducting experiments to get there. And this diagram on purpose shows that sometimes it gets worse before it gets better, right? That's normal. Not, here's the prize, you had the best, you had the straightest line, right? You know, some people say there's an infinite number of ways to get from here to there, right? So we have to find the way that makes sense through experiments. We do have a teaching challenge, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. So when you do a simulation game in the classroom, like the one we're going to do here, one of the first things we noticed is the students completely focus on the puzzle. The students completely focus on the challenge and not the pattern that they're supposed to learn, right? They just, what did you do today? Well, I made a puzzle and I tried to do the puzzle more quickly, right? And it's like, oh, well, what we also want you to get is there's a certain pattern or way of working. So what we've added to the exercise are various tools. Here are some more. Various tools that keep the pattern of working in the attention of the students too. It's not perfect yet, but basically what we're trying to do is make this bar go up. If the student's consciousness is about the game, but not about this, then we haven't transferred the knowledge. Just some examples. Here's one. This is from Pio, right? This was here. Where was that?
It's a school in Stockholm called Hillberg.
Okay.
Which I will talk a little bit about this afternoon.
Oh, excellent. And then this is a middle school science class near Ann Arbor. And this is a fellow, he does a robotics competition. You probably have those here too, right? You make teams and you compete with other teams in the country to make different kinds of robots. And they have to like throw a basketball or kick a soccer ball or something. And he decided that their team would use the improvement kata pattern to meet their robotics challenge. So it's kind of interesting. I like this one because, you know, practice. So there is a PowerPoint file, Pia already mentioned it too, that walks you through the exercise. I'll use the file here today. It's available to you. It has prompts underneath. You can just read underneath if you put it in the instructional, the instructor mode. It actually walks you right through the exercise. The materials are available and they can be changed. Here's what I want to say. Earlier the slide said this exercise introduces a way of scientific thinking. It doesn't teach a way of scientific thinking because it takes practice and time to acquire new skills, to acquire habits. One 50-minute exercise is not enough practice for developing new skills and mindset. So we're very open and honest with the teachers in the United States. We say this exercise is not for the students, it's for the teacher. You are our target. Because if you do this exercise and you say, hey, that's a pretty cool pattern. Maybe I can use this pattern for that report we're going to do about the herring. You know, I chose that for you guys. I like herring. I'm the only American who likes herring. No, just kidding. maybe we can use this when we're doing that social studies report. Maybe we can use that when we're looking at the philosophers and we have, and that's where the repetition comes from. And that's where the practice comes in, right? So we expect if we were showing this exercise to 100 teachers, maybe, 25 will do it. Okay. And of the 25, maybe 10 will leave the poster on the wall and say to the students, hey, why don't we use this again on this project? And then, later, when those students are in a job, and they're sitting there in a meeting, and in the meeting everybody is talking about their opinions about what we should do, that person who was your student will say, wait a minute, we're talking about our opinions here. We don't really know. This is a threshold of knowledge. We should set this up as a series of experiments toward our goal. And I know a good way of doing that. We used to do that in school. That's actually what we're shooting for. That's kind of the goal.